Today marked the third anniversary of the BC Health Minister's declaration of what we're calling a national overdose crisis. With it being the third anniversary, we are people who identify as people who use drugs or people who used to use drugs, and people with lived or living experience. We're members of the community of Nanaimo's drug user population. We've created a platform and an agency to help empower people who use drugs in the community.
So today is the call for action on the overdose crisis, to declare a national overdose crisis. And the reason we're here is to bring awareness.
This is an absolute tragedy, in that it extends back to the earliest days of developing policies on substances, and that we need to consider how do we bring substances in line with the Foods and Drugs Act.
11 people a day die in Canada from opioid use, and in Nanaimo it's really bad. There's a lot of stuff going on in the streets, and a lot of people are dying, and a lot of people are overdosing and like living, but it shouldn't be happening.
When we think about the amount of tragic losses, it's estimated that for every loss there's 35 to 50 non-fatal overdoses, and we need to stand in that reality because it makes it so much more significant. This is what we're standing up for. This is what we're fighting for. We're talking about sons and daughters. We're talking about families and human beings here.
The same response that was taken in British Columbia just over 3 years ago has to be taken nationally. We have to declare this a public health emergency nationally and put in place the same response that the province of British Columbia has done in the last 3 years, which is opening up the legislation to allow for overdose prevention sites to be set up. Overdose death is now the leading cause of death for Canadians aged 30 to 39. The lack of action on the overdose crisis is abhorrent. We need to do something about it, and that's why we're organizing today. Basically, we have the right to be alive, we have the right to exist, we have the right to use drugs, and we're fighting for that right. Thanks to everybody for being here today. We're gonna do the march shortly.
We started the day with a peaceful protest and march up to City Hall. We wanted to give people in the community an idea of the impact and the magnitude of the death toll that has been happening since the public emergency was declared. And the reality of the situation is that, people who use drugs have been dying for years due to the fact that there is not a safe and regulated supply of drugs for people to use.
If you've lost a loved one, a friend, a family member to overdose, we ask you to take a handful of these flowers here and place them in the coffin.
People do drugs because they're hiding something, because they're covering something. Maybe we should stop and say, why are you hurting? Maybe you should stop and give someone a hug. Ask them their name. Maybe if we start caring, people will stop dying. And if we bring in a safe supply and give support, I believe that we can save people in this country. And we all need to stand together and do that.
Finding this thing inside of myself that told me, you know what? You've never felt like you mattered, but you do. And you're worth something. Not because of what I'm doing, but because my heart is still beating and I'm still breathing. And I belong here, regardless of my position in any community. Whether I live the life that I'm living now or I choose to pick up drugs and I hit the streets again. I've lived on the streets in Nanaimo.
I was a marginalized human. I was a non-entity, and I was treated with great disrespect and sometimes hatred by the police and by health professionals. In the hospital, I was refused treatment because I was open in my addiction, and I lived. I lived, and I found recovery.
You can't ask people to act different or be different until they want to be. And if we cannot keep these people alive till that place, we don't know what miracle we're missing out on.
I grew up in the 1960s, and there wasn't only a stigma on drug use, there was a stigma on counseling. And so when I went through a lot of trauma, and a lot of other people who went through trauma, I was afraid to go for help because I was afraid of what was inside of me, you know, because I grew up with suicidal ideation from going through lots of trauma and bullying, and my dad was a war veteran alcoholic, and he brought the war home to us.
Harm reduction, plant medicine, a lot of the things that are happening here, not just, you know, a shoulder to lean on and an ear to listen and meet you where you're at and make sure that you're not alone and you're not using alone and that you're trying to be safe. That's human rights. That's not anything fancy. We need a standard of living, and that's what's happening here. So thank you for letting me be a part of it. It's humbling.
You know, addiction being caused by pain is holistic in nature. It affects the mind, the body, and the spirit, right? So by incorporating holistic recovery models and providing people with unconditional compassion and support, we recognize that providing people with a safe supply of drugs is the most radical form of love. It's the most radical form of community support, and it needs to happen so that people stop dying from fatal overdoses.
If you can dream it, you can become it. And it took me 43 years to believe that. You know, 43 years of doing the same thing over and over again. You know, I'm a survivor of residential school. When I turned, like I was 18 and 19, I ended up getting released from prison, and I borrowed a car that wasn't mine, and I drove it down to Vancouver, got out of the car, and walked down the street, and found Main and Hastings. And the next thing I know, that was in 1989, and the next thing I know, someone's going, "Happy 2007!" And it was like that. I had to make change. You know, so when I came to Nanaimo, I decided to do something different. And I got hooked up with people that were in the same state that I was, that just wanted a new lease on life. And today, my life is good.
All those things that I was able to go through, that was a sign of privilege that I didn't know that I had. I didn't realize that being able to see counselors was a privilege. Being able to get a proper diagnosis without being suspected that you were going to abuse drugs was a privilege. I didn't realize I could lose this once I became poor. I didn't realize that this would be something that I would be discriminated against because I was in that state. We are helping the people who don't have that advantage. We are trying to break down those barriers in the medical system that aren't being put up by the medical system. They're being put up by the rich people, because when I lived in middle class society, when I was part of that world, I could get the help I needed. When I was a youth, I could get the help I needed. As a homeless adult, I can't get that help anymore. I am discriminated against, and that really sucks. I want to try and help the people who have those barriers, try and break it down, and I don't think anyone should go to jail, anyone should have to suffer, nor do I think they should die. And the stigma is strong. Yeah.
It's not about getting high. It's about trying to heal myself. It's really what I use drugs for, and I feel that's what a lot of people are trying to use drugs for. It's trying to heal a healing aspect, and they just get seen as dirty, less of a person, someone that it shouldn't even be considered by someone who doesn't have something on their mind, something that weighs upon them as heavily as it does on some of us. And I really despise that. I don't want to say I hate that, because I don't really hate, I love. But as we come through a world that comes to more accept these substances so that they can actually help people, I do feel that there will be less of a racial divide. And I believe that. I believe that will happen.